to the cloud. I'll put it on this computer for now.
And I should start, I hope, Drew was telling me that you are not necessarily in the path of the hurricane. I hope everybody there is as dry as can be. I know Florence took a toll on a bunch of the state. So I hope
yeah, we were in a great location. Thank you for mentioning that. We're in a great location. We have no complaints, although there are some cities in North Carolina that are literally islands right now, and it's a real problem. Third day of no food, no nothing, no gas, and people are no ATM machines.
Right.
It's hard.
And nowhere to buy stuff, even if you had an ATM machine. I know it's tough.
It's really tough. Yeah. Well, there we go. I'm curious. I'd like to hear it in your own words because I don't know this. How did you? First off, like a resume, how? Tell me about your degrees and your professional experience.
So I've got an undergrad degree, a bachelor's. I've got a master's in public administration and a law degree. Got them at the same time. That was in part to better understand statistics and economics and better understand the why as well as the how to how law and public policy worked. I got my degrees in 2002 as a joint degree.
Where?
And at Harvard University, Harvard Law School. And
I should have known that.
It's a lack of imagination, really. And I drifted into the election world rather than jumping in with 2 feet. It's not like I was super active. In fact, even now, I care far more about the structure than the politics.
Yeah.
So I'm much more of a process guy.
Yeah.
I worked for a judge. I worked on a couple election-related cases with faculty members when I was in school. I worked for a judge who had a few election-related things come his way. And then afterward, mostly because of the timing, I thought it'd be an interesting experience to work for a presidential campaign. And so I actually went to work for a campaign and discovered on that campaign, among other things, I really liked the process a whole lot more than the politics. Went to work for a nonprofit, had the opportunity to serve in a number of different election protection roles. So making sure that people who were eligible could vote and that it would stick. And most recently, the last time we met, I've actually just come out of a very different role, working for the federal government. So working in the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice. On voting, not just on voting, on employment discrimination, on a few other things, but also on voting matters.
Okay.
And now I've been teaching at Loyola with breaks on and off since 2010. Came back to Loyola and had the opportunity to visit, to guest teach at a few other schools around the country, including Caltech, which was fascinating. Teaching undergrads who are going to be engineers about what law is was really, really interesting. And I was at Loyola before going to the Department of Justice and came back to Loyola afterward.
Well, you covered the ocean front here. Just quick questions, rapid fire. BS and what? And social science?
It was a special concentration, actually. It was a concentration I designed myself in essentially how pictures influence people. It was a little bit of psychology and a little bit of visual design and a little bit of history and a little bit of religion, and a little bit of government, and a little bit of neurology, and a little bit of a lot of things.
Very cool. And you mentioned a nonprofit. Who was that? Yeah. Where was your undergraduate? I'm sorry.
It was also at Harvard. That's why it's a lack of imagination.
Okay. Okay, that was at Harvard too. Okay, and you said you worked for a nonprofit. Was I presuming the Brennan Center, or who was it?
Yes. So I actually went to work for a voter engagement operation before that, and then in 2000 shortly. And in 2005, I went to work for the Brennan Center. Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law is a think tank and litigation-based nonprofit It publishes research. It represents election officials. Occasionally, it sues election officials.
Yeah.
And I was working mostly on election administration and voting and redistricting. The Brennan Center also does work on national security. It does work on campaign finance. It does work on, at the time, it did a lot of work on economic rights, does some work on criminal justice, and I worked far less on those things while I was there.
Yeah, by the way, one of my favorite books. I'll do a quick product endorsement here. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
I am.
I'm tracking with you on that. The structure is a problem.
And she was actually a faculty member of mine at the Kennedy School. So she taught for many years at the Kennedy School. So she was one of my professors there.
Very interesting book. I love the view that she's taken, more of a global system, 11 different systems within that one system. Fascinating. And it's, anyway, yeah, we agree on very much about this kind of problem. I just had questions about your research, the paper you did for the Washington Post in the in 2013. I gave you a link to it. Hopefully, I'm sure you're familiar with it, but just some questions about it. Good.
Please.
Okay. Let's see. Part of your, you mentioned the survey said that people aren't feeling better because of voter ID laws, and provide a link to a survey on that. Curious, are you familiar with studies that showed a relative increased Black turnout after the Georgia voter ID and the Indiana voter ID, comparing them, to neighboring states for the same 2008 election?
Yes. I've been critical of studies that rely on turnout increases in a single election, and those two in particular. So, as you know, an awful lot is bound up in who shows up in any given election. There are candidates can make a difference, and spending in an area can make a difference, and the rules on the ground can make a difference, like an ID rule or not. And the weather can make a difference. And there's even a study that shows, for no real rational reason that I can tell, that a home college football game can make a difference in whether people actually show up for an election or not, and who shows up for an election or not. I don't know why that is, but there's a consistent pattern over time. So there's an awful lot that goes into the overall political environment, the environment in that state, who else is on the ballot. There's a lot that goes into turnout over time. And I've been very critical at studies, both studies that find serious decreased turnout and studies that find serious increased turnout, just by comparing election 1 to election 2 in any given state. Georgia and Indiana in particular, from 2004 to 2008, right? They both introduced what I call the more restrictive type of ID laws in 2005. Georgia's was delayed implementation a little bit, and Indiana's went into effect right away. And so the first presidential election where they were both in place was 2008. And one of the studies I'm familiar with compared Indiana and Georgia in 2004 and in 2008. Two big things happened in between that. And particularly, generally, and also African-American turnout through the roof.
Well, let me back up though. I wasn't talking about that study. I was talking about the ones that compared Indiana to Illinois, demographically similar states where the independent variable is voter ID. And then in Mississippi and Georgia, two demographically similar states. And in both cases, the voter ID state had greater African-American turnout, greater participation.
True. Both Indiana and Georgia were considered battleground states, were considered swing states in 2008. And neither Illinois nor Mississippi were. Illinois was safely a Democratic state in the presidential race. Mississippi was safely a Republican state in the presidential race. Both Georgia and Indiana were heavily contested. And in fact, both major political parties had field staff, had ground folks in Georgia and Indiana. There were a lot of ads that were up and running in both Georgia and Indiana. Okay. And in 2008, one of the major parties had an African-American at the top of the ballot.
Oh yeah, there's that, yeah.
But that's the only reason. I don't use that to say that turnout went up or went down. It's that turnout can't show you much in those elections about the way that ID works. So we have no idea, and I've testified to exactly this. Turnout went up, you're right, in both Georgia and Indiana. But we don't know whether turnout would have gone down, but because of voter ID, it went up, or whether turnout would have gone up by a lot, and because of voter ID, it went up by less. That is, we don't know whether ID had from looking at the turnout numbers, whether it had a boost or whether it had a detraction. And so I don't generally think that it's good social science to look at one election's turnout to compare that sort of thing. When you have a bunch of elections over time, it becomes more possible to see general trends. But that example, the 2008 example in particular, there's a big factor that was present in Georgia and Indiana that wasn't present in either Mississippi or Illinois.
Okay. So what I hear you saying is regarding the variables, there are other variables there, not just the fact that Indiana and Illinois are beside each other.
Right.
That resonates. Yeah.
That's exactly right. There are other big variables. It's the example I give is if you show up to a building and there are lots of firemen there and you see lots of damage on the building, it's possible the firemen caused the damage, but it's also possible there was another giant variable that had more to do with the damage. That is, there was a big fire. And Indiana and Georgia are more like that. There was another much bigger factor.
Okay, well, there were we agreed then that the black turnout was higher in all four of those states because of the uniqueness of that election.
That's right.
But I see what you're saying. There are other factors like increased funding, ground game, et cetera.
Yeah.
So there's other variables. And like in all social science, you can't take, you can't draw a whole lot of conclusions from one study. And social science, that's something you and I have talked about before, and I'd like to cover that eventually here, because I think that's a big aspect to this.
Yes.
Okay. Your study, you talk about credible proof and that kind of thing, and it's kind of hard. I want to go as an attorney. I'm not an attorney. I'm just a public policy wonk, and so bear with me. But I think about rules of evidence and things like burden of proof, and that's in your wheelhouse. We agree that I think from election law, the problem that election observers and even administrators have is a fine line between making sure nobody's cheating and disenfranchising people and getting screwed.
Yes.
Okay, so that presents a kind of a unique problem for evidence collection. So first off, what kinds of evidence would be required to get a prosecution?
Oh, so prosecutions are quite difficult. You have to have evidence that somebody intentionally broke the law. For some types of crimes, that's easier than others. And for some types of fraud or election misconduct, that's easier than others. For that reason, I don't rely on prosecutions. So when I was looking at my study, it's not limited to cases where somebody was prosecuted, very specifically because of that reason. So when I say I'm looking for credible evidence, I mean a specific election in a specific place with specific facts. Not, I know those people cheat all the time, or I know there have to be millions of them, but I saw X, or I went and I saw that my vote was cast, and I didn't cast that vote that year, and so a vote was cast in my name, or by the time I got to the polls, somebody had already been there and voted in my name. Now that's just evidence. Some of the times that happens, if you do follow-up, you may find out that actually what you think happened didn't happen. Somebody signed in on the wrong line, and by looking at the poll book, you can see that John Smith and Jonathan Smith, and somebody signs in Jonathan Smith, and they should have signed in at the line above.
Now, let me ask you about that.
Yeah.
Have you looked at poll books in Florida, for example? Because I have not.
I have not looked at poll books in Florida.
Okay, well, I know in New Jersey, the poll book it's your page. In Mississippi, too, it is your page. And so for suddenly, you're signing Justin Levitt, and suddenly someone signs J. DeLancy there, wouldn't they catch that on the spot and correct it? I mean, how would, I'm not sure I'm buying all of these poll book errors that people say just because the signature is different.
It depends on the state, and it depends sometimes on the county. So there are, I can give you an example in California when you sign in Los Angeles when you sign in, there are lines. So there'll be one line and then another line and then another line and another line. There may be 20 different lines to a given page of the poll book.
Each line is a different voter?
Each line is a different voter, that's correct.
Okay.
And so sometimes if people have a common name, where if somebody misreads a name, it is unfortunately not that hard to mistake the line where you're signing for the line right up above or right down below. If I look at a poll book and I see that there are two entries, and somebody has signed in on a line, when it's really clear from the signature, they're the person right above, that's a way to say, okay, it looks like there was a mistake that happened. If you look at a poll book, this also happens. Sometimes individuals who are entering the results of the election hit a typo. They miskey the results when they're going through an Excel spreadsheet, right? They do a check mark or an X next to the wrong name. So if you go back to the poll book and it says that John Smith votes, and you look at the poll book and there's no mark by John Smith, but there's a mark by the person who's next down on the list, that can be a way to say, okay, this didn't happen. And occasionally you find an entry where somebody has signed in and it's not them, or where their signature doesn't actually match the signature in the registration form or in other documentation. And I consider an allegation factual and credible up until it's disproven. So I'm not requiring, it would be nice if people did the investigation first. But in order for me to sort of track, hey, somebody's actually raised a hand here, I'm not requiring that they have done that first. If somebody says specifically, on this date at this location, somebody voted in my name, or I saw X person and I know that they're not Bob Smith because I know who Bob Smith is, that's good enough for me to track. And then I try to follow up to see, was there any further investigation done? Do we know what happened with this individual?
Well, that presents the problem of election day when that happens. I've had numerous cases of people going, I mean, literally the golden BB, we called it in the military, when you fire one bullet and you hit your target, and you go, wow, that was great. A guy was there working the polls. I mean, this is very recently, where he happened to know the name of the individual because it was a precinct level. He knew the guy's name. He said, "Are you him?" And the guy said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, actually, you're not." But instead of doing anything, he just ran him off.
Okay, so first of all, I thank your observer for his service.
Yeah.
Seriously. And secondly, I want to know, because I want to be able to record stuff like that. You brought a couple incidents to my attention since the article was published. Thank you for that. And there are more. There are a few others that I find, including one in North Carolina in 2016, that I want to continue to track. It happens. From everything that I've seen or heard, it doesn't happen very often. But
yeah, let's set aside your study. Let's talk about your experience working in the voter rights section, because This is a very serious problem. We would love to collect evidence, but we don't want to get in trouble doing it. So what sorts of evidence collection for these kinds of situations do you think would be permissible? I know you can't speak for the federal government, but you don't work there anymore. So, just in theory, what kind of evidence and who would collect it is kind of like a part question.
So the first thing to do is, and I know that you tell your folks this, so it's not telling you anything you don't know. The first thing to do is to mention something to the poll workers, to the officials who are actually there on site. They are the election officials. They are in charge of the polling place. If there's specific evidence that somebody has that they say, I know that person's not that person. Now, there are lots of people with the same name, And so I know Bob Smith. If it's really Bob Smith, there may be another Bob Smith in town.
Yeah,
but
this wasn't that, but yeah, I hear you.
Right. And I'm sensitive to it for a bunch of reasons, not only because I've done math on it and the statistics work out, but also there's actually another Justin Levitt in Southern California who works on redistricting. And he spells his name the exact same way that I spell mine, and it's not that common. And so I know that it can happen. Rick Scott in Florida had the same name and birthday of somebody and was tossed off the rolls because somebody thought he was dead. So
okay.
It happens.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah.
But that's part of why the first step is tell the election official. Second is, how does that individual know that there's a problem?
Well, let's stop for a second. Let's talk about the election official.
Sure.
Because in many cases, they have told the election official. And there's really nothing in the law that allows the election official to detain that voter except to file a challenge. And that challenge, the burden of proof is on the official. It's not on the voter to prove their, you can't say, show me your ID. So what do you do? How do you win?
So every state has some mechanism to make sure that you are who you say you are on election day. They vary, right? Just like every state has some means of taxes. The methods of making sure that you are who you say you are vary. And there's a federal law that covers everywhere in the country. If you registered by mail and, well, actually, I just stopped there. If you registered by mail, rather than in front of somebody, in front of an election official, then at some point before you cast your ballot, you have to show that you are who you say you are.
That's HAVA ID though, right?
It's a bunch of things. Your information can be matched up. So if you registered by mail and you put a driver's license number on the form and they can match your name and driver's license number, that counts. If you put social security digits on the form and they can match your name and your social security digits, that counts. If they can't match up your information, or if you didn't put that number on the form because you don't have one of those things, then HAVA ID, you show a series of documents. And the calibration there was some proof that you are who you say you are. Not everybody's got one of those easily, but it's a wider array of options than simply requiring one particular card. And so the thought was, it's a way for people to demonstrate that they are who they say they are without unduly burdening anybody from being able to vote if they're eligible. And so the answer to what can the poll worker ask for depends on the state. And I actually, as long as the rule is calibrated to make sure that people who don't have a particular type of card can demonstrate their eligibility, I don't mind a system that asks for a little more vigorous information. So South Carolina is a pretty good example. South Carolina has a system that says if you have one of the particular cards, you have to show it. And if you don't, you have to fill out an affidavit at the polls explaining that you have a reasonable impediment. You have to sign your name. You have to give a little more information about yourself. That's possible for somebody to sort of get done right there on the spot.
Yeah.
And that system seems to be an appropriate balance of security and flexibility to make sure that people who are eligible can actually vote.
Let's talk about a specific, see if I can find my notes on it. Recall 2008.
I do.
Acorn. Many activists were caught and convicted in numerous states for generating fake voter registrations. Do you remember that?
Right. I do.
Can we agree that not all of them were dumb enough to get caught, that some probably got away with it?
Yes.
Okay. That's my concern. Now, the way it works here is if they got away with it, the Board of Elections would mail them a voter registration card with no photo ID. It's just a registration card with your precinct information. And under the reasonable impediment rule in all 50 states, or well, I shouldn't say that, in every state they have it, one of the things you can bring is that piece of paper. So that's really not an ID, is it?
In some states, that's possible. It's not actually true in every state that that's possible. I'm not aware, and here too, I would love to find an example. I'm not aware of anyone who's ever voted in the name of a fake registration like that. I'm aware of people who have falsified their own registrations and then who have voted, including people who have committed, passport fraud and the like. But I'm not aware of anybody who was registered by a worker that was a fake registration form and then actually voted. And
how would you detect that? How would that be detected? What would stop that voter from walking away if they did it? How could you detect someone who did that? That's what worries me.
Well, for example, somebody showing some sort of identification or some sort of document or some sort of proof that they are who they say they are, that is something other than the card that shows they're not who they say they are.
If they walk in with the card in North Carolina, if they walk in with that card, and South Carolina, if they walk in with that card, that by federal law, the HAVA ID, that is considered a valid ID. So how do you catch someone who has created a fake registration?
It's an interesting question. It is.
Keeps me awake at night.
Yeah. The reason it doesn't keep me awake at night is because the incentive for somebody to fill out a fake registration form in a situation like that where you've got a worker, in some cases somebody being paid by the registration form, is not to commit voter fraud, it's just to get paid. So that person wants to fill out random names from the phone book. They want to fill out Chuck E. Cheese or Mickey Mouse or somebody who doesn't exist. And those people, if they fill out random names for the phone book, those are real people. And some of them have actually stood up and said, we haven't registered. That's part of how some of these people get caught. Sometimes they fill out the names of officials, including government officials, an easy way to get caught.
Yeah. Well, those are the stupid ones. Yeah. I'm talking about the smarter ones.
And I would say most of the examples we have of this, the explanation for why, and I'm not excusing it, by the way. Mm-hmm. Filling out a fake voter registration form is unlawful and should be prosecuted flat out. Yeah. Right, it's correct. But the reason they're doing it doesn't generally lead to votes down the line in the names of those people. When people have gotten caught, the government officials have separated those registration forms. Sometimes the organizations themselves separate those registration forms. Hey, we've got a bunch of forms. We're not sure if our guy was making stuff up or not. Here are the forms. And so you can see what happens to those registrations. If there's reason to believe that the individual falsified them, you don't have to process them at all. So there are some mechanisms to catch that on the front end, and the incentives for the person who's filling out the form don't really go to fake ballots. They're mostly about getting paid for filling out the voter registration forms. I mean, these are generally when people have been caught for being voter registration workers. They are trying to earn extra money.
Yeah.
And many states, by the way, I'm also for this. Many states have implemented policies or laws, some well before 2008 and some more recently, saying that you can't pay people per registration form. That sounds like an absolutely reasonable rule to me. The same with petitions, by the way. Another place that mischief and fraud creeps into the system is in signatures on petitions. Sometimes for ballot measures, we have that out in California, sometimes for candidate petitions. And not paying people per signature, it sounds correct to me.
Yeah, I agree. And we agree that there are individual incentives, but I look at the organizational incentive for those who don't get caught. You know, the ones that get caught, you throw them overboard and go, "Ooh, they broke the rules. They're fired. They're out of here." But the ones who did not get caught, we're not going to comment on those. And that's because those are valid registrations. And if you can put 10 in, I know you get lucky when you catch one, really, like one in California where someone was a junior and there was no junior. Actually, that was in North Carolina also, where it was a junior And it happened that senior was at the polls, and he worked at the polls and said, wait a minute, I don't have a kid. And that guy got caught with 4 of them. My concern is when those things flip to voters, and I think we share that concern. I just don't see how they get caught. It's just dumb luck to get caught because the system, I don't see any systemic process to detect them.
Part of it is in the screening of the registration forms on the front end. And so quality control on organizations that are doing voter registration, or quality control on processing the registrations. It's part of the reason, by the way, I really like online registration systems, which are both more convenient and frankly more accurate. They get rid of a lot of typos. They get rid of a lot of paying people overtime right before an election. They're also usually keyed to some sort of proof of identity somewhere else in the system. So many online systems draw from other government registries where you have to prove your identity first before you go into the system. And that should make everybody happy.
Well, I'm just thinking about the Russians. If you have the data, you can go online and create a bot that'll register people just using spreadsheets and merging data.
You need, in most states, you need more than that because you need the underlying proof of identity at some point in the system. So
driver's license number or last
license number or a federal benefits number or some other way that people have interacted with the federal government or the state government. And that helps.
Never hacks that stuff, right?
Yeah, but I tell you what, that states are actually pretty good on the registration system side from preventing bots from blowing up the registration system. There was a lot of attention, and I'm very worried about cybersecurity. There was a lot of attention paid to hacking reports in the last election, for sure. Oh, yeah. But most of what got hacked is the American public and not the machinery. So we know that there were 2 state voter registration databases that were breached. In one case, some data was exfiltrated. In one case, there's no sign that the data was exfiltrated, but somebody went snooping around. And we know that there were a bunch of voter registration systems where there was suspicious activity, essentially casing the voter registration system, like casing a bank.
So is that kind of infiltration really a risk? I mean, is it something that we should, federal officials should work on? I don't know. I mean, it's just, how big a risk is that? It's the Russians doing it or anybody else?
That, in my mind, is the perfect place where I think a lot of people agree. In fact, I think there may be universal agreement on this. Securing the electronic systems against attack or unauthorized incursion is the sort of security measure that doesn't risk disenfranchising eligible voters, almost ever. And so when we were talking before about there being sort of a fine line between providing more security and making sure that eligible people don't get disenfranchised, securing the systems, the voter registration systems and other systems against hacking and attack is something that where you can have security without risking that other trade-off. And so I think from pretty much across the spectrum, a lot of people are for that sort of security because there's not really a downside other than it costs some money. But there's not really a downside in terms of people's rights.
I agree there, but wouldn't you say it undermines people's confidence in the system to know that you can dump in 100,000 registrations on one day?
Yes, but I don't think you can. So that's what I mean. And here I'm all for extra efforts to make sure that that's true. Most of the states have actually been doing a pretty good job at the state level. Some counties need help. Most of the states have been doing a pretty good job of securing against that sort of automated system at the state level. And they've gotten some help occasionally. Some have been slow to ask for it. Some have been welcoming of it from the federal government. But the federal government, frankly, has been late to the game in providing that sort of support. States were on it first. Yeah. And in my view, sort of properly so. Yeah. And that's not just in the registration system. So there was an attempted there was an odd absentee ballot request scheme in Florida. I can't recall the exact year, but between 6 and 10 years ago ish, where a pattern of requesting absentee ballots looked quite suspicious.
Yeah.
And because state officials and local officials were on it, they tracked the IP addresses, they tracked the number of requests that were coming in from particular locations on particular days, and they flagged it in a way that is the analog of stopping sort of 100,000 people registering from the same IP address or from the same series of bots on the same day. So yes, if there are ways to increase that sort of security in ways that don't involve really hard trade-offs about making it harder for eligible people to cast ballots, I'm all for it. And I think there's pretty broad agreement on that, actually.
I agree. I mean, no one cares about how you analyze the back end of data, typically.
Right. Well,
you're not taking action. You're not pulling people off the voter roll based on it. You're just analyzing data. And so I agree.
And nobody cares other than the officials, who care a lot. Actually, the state officials, local officials have been, in my experience, pretty proactive about this sort of thing.
That's hit or miss depending on the state. I think you would agree.
That's fair. That is fair.
Enough about Virginia.
Yeah, well, there are also some budgetary concerns, and it's not an excuse, but I would rather, we do elections on the cheap in this country, and I would rather that we thought they were worth more. I would rather that we spent up to give us the sort of elections that we really deserve.
Another point we agree on, yes. Yeah, look, those states that were hacked, Georgia was one of them, right? I don't remember the other one.
So I have to be careful here because I was in the federal government during 2016. The information that we know of publicly is that Illinois was the state where data was exfiltrated. So that's the state where there was an incursion and data was extracted. And Arizona was the state where there was an incursion and people went snooping around, but there was no other indication that anything happened. Where data, and there was no indication, I should be absolutely clear, there's no indication that any data was changed in any state. So in Illinois, they went in and took some stuff. In Arizona, they went in and looked around. I did not hear their concerns in Georgia. I think it's sort of correctly calibrated concerns about the security of the system.
Yeah, they use 100% DRE. So
and that's also concerning. But I do not know that there's been any public statement at all about Georgia's voter registration system being hacked.
All right. So in the one you mentioned in Illinois, did they take just the voter roll, or did they take something more substantial?
No, as far as I know, just the voter roll. So information that would otherwise have been public.
Yeah.
They just got it.
It's free in North Carolina. Yeah.
it's information that's public, and I confess I don't know whether it's free or whether there's an administrative cost, but they could have gotten that same information. They just got it in an unauthorized fashion, which is
they did it like 14-year-olds hacking in.
Yes.
Just saying. All right. Wrapping up back on the impersonation deal.
Sure.
Your study, you talk about it, impersonation being slow and clunky way to steal elections, which is why it rarely happens. And that has become a matter of fact. It's kind of like the canons of political science to say that now. How do we know that it rarely happens?
So the way that we have to know is by the any sense of reporting that it has happened to people. The way to find out about littering in the streets is to look around and see if anybody's complaining about littering. And the way to find out about this sort of impersonation is for anybody to raise a hand saying, hey, somebody voted in my name, or I know that I know Bob Smith and that's not Bob Smith. And I'm talking here about voting in person in the name of somebody else.
Yeah.
In particular, in a way that having a strict photo ID rule would help. So that sort of thing doesn't help if you go out and get a fake ID, if you go out and get a fake driver's license.
Well, wait a minute. Fake driver's licenses are harder, but yeah, I agree. The fraud-friendly ID that it cracks me up when they call Virginia strict ID when they watered it down immediately, and now you can any ID card as long as the picture matches the name. So that is a very weak. Would you agree? That's a weak ID.
I don't know. It depends on. I have to go refresh my memory about what it is Virginia's actually using. I'm talking about
business or colleges, in addition to the DMV issued documents.
Yeah, I would say, I wouldn't say that it's weak. I would say it's on a spectrum, right? There are lots of different ways that states allow you to prove that you are who you say you are. Some are very restrictive, and with that comes the potential for eligible people not to have the ID they need. Some states are in different places on the spectrum. Like I said, a state like South Carolina that's got a few preferred IDs, and then if you don't have one of those, you have to fill out an affidavit with a little more oomph to it.
Yeah.
I'm not particularly troubled as long as there's that fail-safe, and as long as poll workers know how to apply it. It's another big if. But on the state, what I was talking about, there are some instances where people have committed Social Security fraud and have gone out and gotten a fake Social Security number, and then have gotten a fake birth certificate, and then have gotten a fake driver's license or a fake passport. Having an ID rule won't fix that, because the thing that somebody shows up with is the same thing that I have, is the same thing that you have.
Well, an ID, you mentioned different kinds of crimes on that note. Let's see, like the famous Walker 30, where is it? Scott Walker 13, I'll call him the Walker 13. Some guy who had, you said 13 counts of election fraud, including registering to vote in more than one place.
Yes.
Where he didn't live. That was one individual.
Yes.
Wouldn't voter ID, maybe it wouldn't stop that, but wouldn't that impact success for people to do that?
It's not designed to. So most rules that I know of an ID is meant to show that you are who you say you are. And virtually every state, I think, allows you to vote with a passport, right? Considered sort of the gold-plated ID. And my passport, as long as I got it once, 10 years ago or whenever it was due for renewal, I may have moved on past that a long time ago. And so if I can vote with a passport, it doesn't really stop being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Okay. Not talking about those as much, because you talk about different kinds of crime that voter ID, you said the kind of fraud that ID cannot stop, among them fake registration forms or voting from the wrong address.
Yes.
Wouldn't you agree that voter ID would make those less appealing as methods to commit fraud?
It depends on what you make the ID, and the stricter you make the ID, the more you risk disenfranchising people. So if the particular address on your ID has to match the particular address at which you're registered, that would help stop people from voting at the wrong place. But it would also mean that people who've moved since the last time they got their ID would have a harder time of voting. And many election policies, I mean, we discussed this before, fall somewhere along that spectrum. You have to calibrate the risk that somebody's going to vote improperly or incorrectly against the risk that somebody who's eligible, who really wants to vote, who can vote, is kept away from the polls by a requirement for something they don't have.
Well, is any state restrictive? I mean, is any state really, really restrictive to turn away lawful voters?
Yeah, there have been, and courts have pushed back on this to some degree. So I take as an example Texas's law that was passed in 2011 that was implemented in 2013. Texas demanded one of a very small number of IDs, a very small sort of a limited type of ID And every state's going to be different in this respect, right? Texas is huge. And some of the IDs that they required meant that you had to be able to drive without a license 90 minutes in either direction to get a plastic laminated card and dig up a bunch of underlying documentation for that before you got it. In Arkansas, you needed a birth certificate to get a state driver's license. But in order to get a birth certificate, you needed to show your state driver's license. So to get the thing that you needed for the license, you needed a license, and you're sort of stuck in a bureaucratic loop. And any of us who've been to, have had an unpleasant experience with the Department of Motor Vehicles in our state or another government bureaucracy knows that sometimes it can be maddening to try and punch your way through. In Wisconsin, before they relaxed the rules a bit, Wisconsin had a very strict ID system. And there were people who documented going to the DMV 5 or 6 times and getting rejected, even though they were eligible citizens, because they didn't show X or Y that was dotted in the particular place. These were DMV clerks that weren't giving people the ID that they really needed. And that's time that not everybody's got and expense that not everybody can afford. So as long as there's, for most people, 90% of Americans have current and valid driver's licenses, roundabout. And that varies by state, obviously. I don't think the fight over voter ID is about that 90%. It's really about the people who don't and how we have a system that accommodates that need. People talk about, why don't we have the same rules that we have for getting on an airplane?
Yeah.
And I explain, first of all, it's not a fundamental constitutional right to get on an airplane, but you actually don't need a photo ID to get on an airplane.
Maybe you have. Most people do.
No, I promise you, it's official TSA rules that say if you have one, you have to show it, and it makes your life easier. There's no question it makes your life easier. But if you don't, there's a set procedure, a documented procedure for confirming that you are who they say you are. They'll ask you for other stuff besides a driver's license. They'll put you through a secondary screening where you get frisked, right? There are other available options to accommodate people who don't have the one preferred thing. Mm-hmm. And most of the fight about voter IDs, I think, is about that. It's how to accommodate the people who are eligible, who don't have one of the singular documents that a state may require. And most states, like I said, are somewhere on this spectrum. They allow a range.
Okay. Well, that's looking at it from one end, and I look at it from the other end and go, the type 2 error here is that we open the door for fraud. If we make it as easy as possible for people to vote, we're willing to do that at the cost of, okay, we'll let someone steal an extra vote or 10 or 12, and then how do we prove it? And so I don't want to keep you all day. I promise not to, and I think your time is valuable too. Let's see. So I wanted to go to that and then kind of see if you have anything to add. But it's you're familiar with Carl Sagan and his famous quote: "Absence of evidence is not absence." I blew it. Absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence.
Correct.
Schrodinger's black cat. It's just those are problems. So we're talking about fraud here, which by design is intended not to be caught. It's intended not to be detected. Agreed?
Yes.
Okay. Now, given the evidence collection problems we talked about, how do we design, well, let's see, how would a detection failure prove that something does not exist?
A single detection failure wouldn't. But multiple repeated examinations that fail to reveal the thing give increasing confidence that the thing isn't there. If you're looking for, if you're in a city and you suspect there's a giant murder rate, but nobody's ever found a body, you can't prove that people aren't getting killed all over the place. But the more times you look and you don't find bodies, the more comfortable you can be that it's not the purge out there. And
Let's talk
so,
about vote fraud, though. You can't shoot pictures in the polls, so you can't prove it that way. You can't demand an ID of the voter if you think maybe that is not Fred Smith, because I played golf with Fred Smith a week ago. I want to see your ID. You can't ask for that ID. So you've kind of tied the hands of people who are going to try and detect it and gather the kind of evidence you need to get a prosecution, wouldn't you?
so I'll confess to get a prosecution, perhaps, but just backing up on whether it happens or not, right? I know that there have been restrictions on the challenge rules in North Carolina. I don't know North Carolina's, and particularly for residents. I don't know, I confess, North Carolina's rules for challenging identity at the polls. I don't know what they are.
I'll tell you what it is real quick is
Okay.
you can challenge them, but the burden of proof is on the challenger, and you're not allowed to ask for the ID of the individual.
So were there challenges about identity that particular people made because they know that's not Fred Smith? Has that happened?
Well, no, that's the only mechanism there is, and it's a fool's game because the challenger cannot prove it, even if I know it, unless we can detain that voter and call the law and bring them in. But there's no procedure in our state election manual for that situation.
So I guess if that were happening a lot, I would be more concerned. But it's true. So if you told me I had hundreds of people in poll worker in at the polls, and I heard the person call Fred Smith, and I note that's not Fred Smith.
What are the odds of that? First off, the odds are slim of even that, right? That I would know Fred Smith?
Sure, in some places, it depends on where you live, obviously.
Like early voting, early voting when they have these super centers?
So early voting at the super centers, there are often, even in some states, increased security measures for being able to show, again, some range of documentation.
Well, back up. Who's going to know if I walk in there early voting in a super center? My neighbors don't work there. Who's going to know if I walk in and claim to be Fred Smith and I get the address right, which is all you need is a name and address. That's true in California too.
You usually need to sign in.
You sign at some point, yeah, but they don't check the signatures, you know that.
Yeah, well, sometimes they do.
On the spot, checking the signatures.
In some states, there are signatures actually on the line with the poll book. There's the signature, so the person's name and address is here. The line for them to sign in is there, and then facing the poll worker, so it's upside down to the voter.
Yeah.
But facing the poll worker is the signature that's digitized from the voter registration form.
Well, if they're checking, there wouldn't be any administrative errors then, because we circle back to that other problem where it wasn't fraud; it was an administrative error. So, which is it? Are they checking them or are they not checking them?
In some places they check them, and in some places they're less good about it. But that mechanism exists. It's also possible to go back, and there are some areas that have done this. Philadelphia actually did a really interesting one. They did a forensic analysis to look at a bunch of different elections and actually compile the poll books, right? To go back and look and to do, after the election, signature matching to really see how many people signed in where we have serious questions about whether this person was who they claimed to be. And this was a bipartisan thing in Philly. There was a pretty comprehensive report put out. And I think it actually was helpful because it showed some administrative errors, right? Somebody on the wrong line. It showed one individual who I think is on my list, a gentleman by the name of, ostensibly by the name of Joe Cheeseborough, who there were questions about. But it didn't show lots of people with signatures that weren't theirs signing in. And it didn't show that people were using these voter registration cards to sign in. It showed some of them, the ones who had to show their ID at some point, who had to prove that they are who they say they are at some point between registering and casting a ballot. These folks used other methods, including matching social security numbers up, including matching driver's license numbers up. So yes, any one study shouldn't convince you that there's absence.
Speaking of that, the Philly study, if you would make a note, please send me a link to it at some point. I'd love to read it. Okay, moving on. You
actually, I'll get Drew to hold me to that.
Okay, Drew, don't forget. Okay, gosh.
Because I'll do it as soon as we're off. I'll go find it and I'll send you.
Okay, you mentioned the study said 31 cases, so you didn't count. There were so many dead cases, so many dead voter cases that you listed in your study. Were they disproven, or how did they, like one of them was 44, I'm trying to find it. It was, number 29, said 44 individuals with names, names, dates of birth, and social security numbers matching individuals who incarcerated were recorded as having cast ballots in Michigan. How come that didn't count in the 31, for example?
Oh, it did. It's 31 different instances where the flag has been raised, right? Okay. So, yes, it's not total number of ballots, but every time that a flag had been raised, I tried to indicate how many specific ballots were mentioned. So yeah, that was number 29.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there have been
31. Yeah, okay.
And I should add, there have been in response to that study. There were, and part of the reason that I put it out there is to invite people to find me with other examples. People did, you did. And I think I continue to keep track, including I mentioned there was a woman who voted in the name of her, I believe, dead mother. Her mother was really adamant in North Carolina, Catawba County. Her mother was really adamant that she wanted to cast a vote for President Trump. She passed away before the election. Her daughter had power of attorney and went to the polls and cast a vote in her mother's name. Mm-hmm. It's unlawful. I believe it was referred for prosecution. Yeah. That was 2016. So there have been a few since, for sure. I think I'm now up to 45.
That's a start.
Yes. It's not, and look, I want to be clear. It happens, right? I've said this consistently. It happens. Part of why I wanted to document when it happens is to acknowledge that it happens. And part of why is to try and get a sense of the volume, because I will take credible allegations from anywhere. And as a result of the study, a bunch of people from all over the place contacted me and said, not a bunch of people, a few people, it's from 31 to 45 now. A few people contacted me and said, yes, I know that in this particular place, in this particular time, somebody voted in somebody else's name. Some of them said somebody signed in as me, and I haven't been able to track down. Part of the reason I haven't updated the study is that I haven't been able to track down the polling pages to go back and look to see, okay, is it obvious that this was an administrative error? Or does it look like somebody signed in your name? But for the moment, that's a credible allegation. It's not a huge number.
Yeah, okay. All right, yeah, my concern is that any academic who says the upper limit is this because of the optics, like the movie Predator, you needed a certain kind of lens to see the predator, and it's that kind of thing. I think the optics are bad.
And I agree that I have not hit the upper limit. I am trying to collect as much evidence as I can to get a sense of what the scope of that upper limit might be. So, yeah, if I have the wrong lens on and people show me that I've got the wrong lens on because here are examples A, B, and C that you didn't include. As you presented some of the evidence to me that you collected, I want to include them. It's not intended to be the final word. It is another piece of evidence that happens to be consistent with most of what I've seen so far.
Okay, well, that said, how does it make you feel? This is kind of the question that we first met, asked you. How does it make you feel when John Oliver or some, wizard of smart comes along and says they cite your study? I mean, the New York Times even did it as proof that the upper limit is minuscule. How do you feel about that?
I don't like it when the study is used to say things that the study doesn't say. I tried to be pretty clear in the text of the thing itself. I encourage people to go back and read it. As you know, I wasn't able to do a lot of correction. I wasn't able to talk about anything that I had done in a non-governmental capacity when I was serving in a governmental capacity. I took that, the oath to serve in a particular role, very seriously. When people call me for comment, I explain to them what the study shows and what it doesn't.
Well, Jim Rittenberg didn't call you. He just cited it. And I said,
not everybody calls me for comment.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. And that's pretty much, unless you want to add something in general, I do want to go over some administrative things, but let's, as far as the interview goes, that's it, unless you have anything you want to add.
I don't think so. Drew, is there anything that I missed? I can ask the one who's been listening the entire time.
Well, she was over there checking her email, right, Drew?
No, she's been diligently standing. I feel bad because she's been standing the entire time.
Okay. Did Drew say anything?
She was trying. I think she's trying to make sure that the camera's off and make sure that it's safe.
Okay. All right, a couple of quick administrative. Per your agreement, I will put a complete, uninterrupted, the complete interview. I will post it on YouTube. I'll link it on my site, and it'll be available for fair usage. Anyone who wants to use it, right?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Good.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
It was a great interview. Thank you for taking the time. I've been wanting to do this since we first met. And
I know, and I appreciate your passion for it, and I appreciate your passion for what you do. I thank you for bearing with me on the scheduling problems. Like I said, I was called away to testify in court, not on election administration thing at all, on a redistricting matter. But the judge tells me where to show up and when, and that's not something I have the capacity to overrule.
Yeah, apology fully accepted and understood. I knew that it was a roll of dice. You're a busy guy. You teach. I take it.
Yeah, when I control my calendar, I don't like to change what I've committed to. When I don't control my calendar, I can only do something. Right.
Okay. Well, that's it for me. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Stay dry. I hope that you and others stay as dry as possible.
Oh, thank you. You know it. I'll send you a link when we finally get this thing.
Excellent. Okay. And I will, whether Drew reminds me or not, I'll send you a link to the Philly study.
Okay, very good. All right. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.